Today on Lightning Bugs.
What goes through your mind, and how's that feel just stepping out into space for the first time like that?
Well, the spacesuit is an incredibly complex machine in and of itself, and you end up being a human satellite. The spacesuit protects you against the temperatures, which can be very, very cold, something like minus 100 at night, or very, very warm, about plus 150 during the day. And oh, by the way, we go from day to night or night to day every 45 minutes. But you don't really feel that because there's no air to carry the temperature. So what gets to those temperatures are the surfaces of the space station, let's say, and the surface of your spacesuit, of course. But it's incredibly well insulated to the point that those temperature transitions, you don't even feel them. What makes you feel hot or cold in the suit is how hard you're working, because the heat that you generate in your body doesn't go anywhere, can't go anywhere. So if you're really working hard, you'll notice that it's getting a little warm, and you'll turn the air conditioning up, if you will, to get it cool again. It's a magnificent experience. There's really nothing like it in the world. It's a little bit like scuba diving, but it's, obviously there's no viscosity, there's no up, there's no down, there's no concerns with bubbles. I mean, it's pretty magical.
Hi, if you're enjoying listening to Lightning Bugs, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. It helps a lot.
My guest today is Michael López-Alegría. He's an astronaut, test pilot, and retired captain in the Navy. Michael has more than 40 years of aviation and space experience with the Navy and NASA in a variety of roles, including naval aviator, engineering test pilot, and problem manager, NASA astronaut, and International Space Station commander. He's completed 3 Space Shuttle missions and 1 International Space Station mission. He holds the record for the most spacewalks. He's done 10. And for cumulative extravehicular time, 67 hours and 40 minutes. As of 2017, Michael is the Vice President of Business Development for Axiom Space. We got a lot to learn from Michael, so let's talk about creativity with Michael. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ben. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm a little intimidated by creative people, but let's go.
Man, I am intimidated by probably astronauts and maybe, let's say, gymnasts. I don't know why. That seems like I can't imagine doing either one of those things. I'm sure I'm more scared than you are. So this is the only podcast I haven't made. I normally make a bunch of notes about what we're going to talk about, but this actually does have me stumped. But I'll say one thing, which is I know that I'll be speaking with someone who's in a very small group of people who have gone into space and seen the Earth from that perspective. And I think even creativity, your perspective on that, anything I'm going to say is a welcome perspective. Do you feel, since you've been going to space, that were a different person before and after?
Well, yes, absolutely. There is a shift in perspective that happens to people, and it happens universally to people who have been to space, and particularly people who have orbited the Earth. It's not exactly the same thing, but that perspective change, I think, is fairly obviously caused by this unique view that we have of the Earth. We go around it once every 90 minutes, and as it's turning below us, we see a different swath of land. And it really puts things in a different light when you can see the sort of almost the entirety of humanity in, not in a very, very short time. It makes you feel very small. It makes you look down and you don't see conflict and disease and hunger and all the problems. You just see this beautiful planet that is very unique compared to everything else around. And it makes you want to protect the planet, and it makes you want to try to get people on it to get along a little bit better. We like to say we're all crew members on the same spaceship, which is Earth, and we only have one of them. And so I think it makes you a more tolerant person. It makes you sort of embrace other ideas, other cultures, other norms, other religions, other, your answer here. And it's a very positive thing.
When you've made all, done your missions, certainly you are mostly focused on some pretty intense tasks. The people that you'll be taking up, and like a friend of mine's, William Shatner, and I had him on the show right before he went up. I believe I saw a changed man even at 90 when he landed. But he didn't have to think about anything except for just going up in the ship. That's a different experience, isn't it, from you? I mean, you're really focused on something that's probably fairly intensely technical and over all of our heads.
Yeah, I think in most cases, the duration of the mission is inversely proportional to its intensity. So the shorter missions, I flew 3 space shuttle missions, as you mentioned, and they were about 2 weeks each. And then my ISS mission was 7 months. So in 7 months, it's more like living in space, whereas 14 days, you're really working in space. I mean, it's a sprint compared to a marathon. What I will say, and I thought William Shatner's comments when he returned were very eloquent and very emblematic of what most people feel when they see the Earth from that perspective, is that the folks that are flying on this mission coming up in February, AX-1, the 3 private astronauts, in fact, are going to be very busy. They are not going to be tourists with nothing to prepare. They each have a science program. They each have a timeline that's going to be packed with activities. So it's going to look a lot like a government mission, only the participants will be private astronauts.
That's fantastic. Okay. I kind of like the idea that you've got a job and you're not sitting like on a Ferris wheel. I mean, I imagine that really makes the experience a different thing to be part of it.
Yeah, 100%. In fact, having flown those 3 shuttle flights, I kind of always thought of myself as more of a sprinter than a marathoner. And I was a little bit concerned about how was I going to, be able to last those 6 months turned into 7. And what I found is what makes a difference is having meaningful work. You're sort of at the tip of the spear. You have teams of people on the ground who are counting on you to perform well. And that just keeps you going. And I think the same will be true for these guys, even though it's only 10 days, they'll be very busy and they'll be very engaged. And I think they're going to look back on day 9 and go, wow, that was fast.
Yeah, Bill's comments when he landed, and it was a little bit of chaos. Like when I get off a stage, at least there's someone there handing me a water and a towel or something. I felt like he just got off. It was standing there. They were popping champagne and stuff. And he was talking about his experience. And his experience was, I felt like what I was seeing is a 90-year-old artist who was expressing the thing that resonated the most with him, which was how quick it was. And what a small blue veil, he said, he passed through so quickly. And to him, it was like all the black was like, he equated that immediately in terms of imagery with death, which I thought was pretty intense. I figure that is his reference point because of his age. And to me, what I saw was his looking at his life as such a quick trajectory up and back. And I felt like he just had this pretty intense revelation. Have you had a different sort of perspective and revelation upon every exit from our atmosphere?
Well, let me clue you into something, Ben. It turns out that astronauts in general are not terribly creative, nor are we artists. There are some exceptions.
Yeah.
I am probably at the very end of the spectrum when it comes to a lot of, or let's say engineering sense, very Cartesian and not very creative. And so I think that it's not surprising that somebody like William Shatner has those eloquent words coming back, who's just gushing, emoting all the things that he felt. Whereas somebody like me gets off a space shuttle and thinks about, that 1.5 G's felt more like 1.75. You know what I mean? And so I'm a very poor example of a creative person. I do think that there are some astronauts who have flown who are musicians, who are poets, who write well. And those folks are probably a lot better at expressing how the adventure made them feel than I would be.
Well, I wanted to talk to him again about maybe putting together something with the National Symphony Orchestra at the Kennedy Center, which is something that I do a lot. I do a lot of work at the Kennedy Center with the National Symphony. I think it would be interesting for him to take his story and his perspective and turn it into something compelling and artistic, just simply because I think, while he wasn't going to be any good to anyone during the mission, maybe just buckling a seatbelt or something like that, he's not going to be of any use to you. There is a usefulness to telling the story, whatever story that might be, like the things that you learn by space exploration, that you can turn around and explain it to people, because most of us dummies here on Earth only respond to narratives.
Well, it's interesting, and I think that's a real benefit to this idea of democratizing the experience to more and more people, because we do need to have creative people, artists, et cetera, that are good at explaining, at conveying, whether it's through pictures or lyrics or words of a poem or movie making, some greater understanding of what the experience is like than what somebody like me as an engineer would come back and talk about. So I do think it's wonderful to be opening the aperture, so to speak, and having more and more people be able to experience what it's like.
Well, one of the greatest stories told from a space mission, in my opinion, as a photographer, is there's something I do on the side, was that one photograph, I don't know which one, you'll know who took the picture, called Earth Rising.
Yeah.
That's a story. That right there, the perspective of that story moved a whole world of people just because of the title. That's very artistic. Yeah,
that was taken by the Apollo 8 crew, I think specifically by Bill Anders. And his quote that went along with that was something like, "We came all this way to explore the moon and we discovered the Earth." It's beautiful.
That's all I need as a songwriter. Well, let's look at the idea that, because the podcast is about creativity, and I feel that almost everyone is creative, which is why I'm doing this. I mean, you have to create your life in some way. You end up creating something about your occupation, your house, and the choices you make. I guess there's a line between a choice and actual creation. But let's suppose for a second that there are people who just have as low as you can imagine on the creativity spectrum. And you're saying that you think that's you.
I think I'm on the list. I'm on the short list. You bet.
Yeah. Do you think that helps you in your, I'm not sure I believe you, but do you think that helps you in your job?
I think it probably does. I feel like creative people are, they're more apt to have their thoughts wander, and they let them wander, and they wander for good reasons. And, when you're focused on something, I almost feel like they're at odds with each other, the creativity and the focus. Now, that could be just a layman's interpretation, but my sense is that, being able to compartmentalize and think about and multitask, think about different things is an asset that it makes one a better operator, better astronaut, and probably doesn't help on the creativity front.
Well, it makes me think about the concept of intuition. And, a musician or an artist is supposed to be a fairly intuitive person by nature. And it makes me think that there's probably a lot of tasks that you need to perform really well that might be anti-intuitive. Is that true? Like, are there things that you need to do that would make a normal person hesitate because they don't make intuitive sense at that moment?
I don't think so. That doesn't ring true to me. I mean, some things are new, and that doesn't make them not intuitive, right? They're just something you hadn't thought about in a certain way before. And I'll tell you, we do a lot of training at NASA. I did as a career astronaut, and now that we're back training to go to the ISS, we have to do a fair amount of training here at the Johnson Space Center. And that's all about developing skills. So once you see something and you understand the concept behind it, it doesn't really matter if you can memorize all the steps in the procedure. It just matters how you see the big picture. And I think the things that we do in general are not counterintuitive. They're just new for most people.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, because I see, just even pilots are thinking about someone landing on a aircraft carrier, and it just looks like a wreck to a musician. It looks like this is a wreck, and it just needs to be the best wreck it can be. And I just imagine as someone with my brain, I'm not sure that would work out too well.
Well, in that realm, I mean, I think sticking your head outside the hatch on a spacewalk is a little bit like that, right? It's not intuitive to put yourself outside of a vehicle that's 250 miles above the Earth, traveling at almost 18,000 miles an hour. That doesn't feel right. But again, after training on something like that many, many times, in a big swimming pool, by the way, with mock-ups all around you that look just like the environment, it becomes second nature. And the fact that you can see the Earth passing below your feet is interesting, but that's just not part of the task, and therefore you just keep going. So it is a learned, I'd say, skill to be able to overcome those initial reactions to say, I don't want to land on that tiny postage stamp in the water, or I don't want to stick my head out this hatch.
Yeah. Now I'm going to go for the couple of just numbskulled questions that I'm sure you've had to answer a million times, but I've got you here and I'm just very curious. I mean, when I was a kid, I watched, I'm 55, and I watched from the time I was 3 years old. I can remember on a snowy TV screen seeing every televised moon mission that I could have seen at that age, and I learned about astronomy the best I could in my spare time. I was fascinated with it. I always wondered, like, just all the dumb things about how it feels to go out of the spacecraft. I mean, given what you're wearing, is it freezing cold, or is it? I should know this because I should have read it, but what goes through your mind, and how's that feel, just stepping out into space for the first time like that?
Well, the spacesuit is an incredibly complex machine in and of itself, and you end up being a human satellite. The spacesuit protects you against the temperatures, which can be very, very cold, something like minus 100 at night, or very, very warm, about plus 150 during the day. And by the way, we go from day to night or night to day every 45 minutes. But you don't really feel that because there's no air to carry the temperature. So what gets to those temperatures are the surfaces of the space station, let's say, and the surface of your spacesuit, of course. But it's incredibly well insulated to the point that those temperature transitions, you don't even feel them. What makes you feel hot or cold in the suit is how hard you're working, because the heat that you generate in your body doesn't go anywhere, can't go anywhere. So if you're really working hard, you'll notice that it's getting a little warm, and you'll turn the air conditioning up, if you will, to get it cool again. It's a magnificent experience. There's really nothing like it in the world. It's a little bit like scuba diving, but it's, obviously there's no viscosity, there's no up, there's no down, there's no concerns with bubbles. I mean, it's pretty magical.
I may, by the way, something I was doing with the early versions of this podcast was I was making a song from every conversation. And then I realized I had to actually do other things with my life besides that. So the first 20 episodes, I did that. I'm kind of inclined to let you have co-written your first song, by the way. So I think I might work on that a little bit, if you don't mind. What's that?
Sorry. Go ahead.
Do you are there any, besides, like, for me, it was that, I think the two things that have moved me, about space that have come from experience were, I think Shatner, the things he said. I think because you don't normally see an astronaut land and start speaking that way. I mean, that's not what that would be weird. And also the photograph that I mentioned. What pieces of music, poetry, art, photography of any kind have actually explained your experience at all, in your opinion? Like something that you've heard or seen that has been like, I couldn't have expressed that, but that is what it's like.
Well, I think this picture that you mentioned, Earthrise, is iconic and, sort of singular in its meaning. And I would add one to that. And there is a close-up picture of a boot print on the moon, which may or may not be, Neil Armstrong's first footstep, which I think sort of in a very different way speaks incredible volumes to the achievement that it was in 1969 with the technology that we had back then to have done what we did.
Hey, I'm sorry, but to clarify, you said that may or may not have been in an era where everyone likes to make a conspiracy out of everything. It was a photograph of a footprint on the moon, but just maybe not the first one's what you're saying.
Yeah, who knows? I mean, we'd like to think it was. I certainly, I think it's been proposed as one and as the first one. And there's another one that goes along with it that actually has the boot sort of stepping out of a boot print. Now, I would guess that's not the first one unless he was very clever and able to do a selfie with his camera as he was taking the first step. But that is almost as, meaningful because the other one is almost black and white, right? Because of the regolith, the color of the surface of the moon, and pretty much everything is black and white on the moon. But this inserts this white boot, which is undeniably a representation of humanity, which I think is even more compelling than the stark one by itself.
Mm. Anything in terms of music by, like, there's or movies by people who have never experienced a space? How do you feel when you see like a 2001 Space Odyssey or hear like, Rocket Man by Elton John or something? Do these things resonate with you at all?
Well, I still don't understand the end of 2001. If you do, please explain it to
me. Me neither. Besides the end, what about the rest of it when it's...
Yeah. I mean, all those, genre of films, as somebody who lives or has lived and breathed that stuff, you tend to look at things with a little bit of a different eye. But I remember going to see the movie Gravity, which in some ways is amazingly detailedly accurate. The spacesuit mock-up, the interior of the vehicles was remarkably accurate, but then they sort of just ignored some pretty obvious laws of physics, which, makes you wonder why. It may just had to be the script, right? But I think you go into those things and I felt like, Al Capone going to watch The Godfather or something. I mean, it was entertaining, and that's the point, right? You can't really get too down in the weeds. Right. As far as music, it's corny, but Holst the Planets is great.
Oh, I love to hear that. That's great.
Yeah, and I think for me, classical music sort of fits experience a little bit better than, and I'm a fan of modern music, but I don't see modern music evoking the same kinds of feelings as classical music does when you're floating in space and looking at the Earth.
I think that's actually pretty huge. I love that you've actually spent time there, and that something about, quote, classical music would be closer to large enough to encompass that experience. I love that. What about you? Did you have any any kind of arts or music as part of your upbringing at any point?
I played the guitar when I was a kid. I can kind of still play it. I can read chord music, but I don't read music per se. I have had a dream I had a New Year's resolution a few years ago to learn to play the piano. And I bought a piano and I was taking lessons. And I think I have two observations. I mean, one is, boy, it takes practice. And I think the older you are, the more practice it takes.
That's true.
And the second thing is, I think I can, and I've put that on hold, obviously, for the busy training schedule that we have now, but I think I could get to the point where I could play music, but I don't think that's the same thing as being creative with music.
Yeah.
You know, the branch I wanted to go into was sort of jazz improvisations or standards, which I think has some creativity to it. And what I found I'm much better at is just playing classical pieces, you know, from just basically reading the music, and then it becomes memory at some point. Mm-hmm. And that's just, I think, very much my personality, that I'm much better at tasks and things that are repetitive than I am at invention.
Yeah. And, well, when it comes to improvisation, by the way, you know, it does require a vocabulary and its own practice. So to a degree, the same way as you're speaking, I mean, you don't just repeat what people tell you. You're creating sentences and thoughts, and that is like that with improvisation. I mean, what's shown on brain scans is that it's pretty well coming from the same place. So if you're creating a sentence while you're speaking, and that area is lighting up in your brain scan will show the same thing as soon as you start successfully improvising. But it requires a vocabulary. So people are like, I'm just supposed to make something up. Not really. You first have to learn the syntax and the grammar and the vocabulary stuff to make it happen.
The musical analogy to that, right? You have to understand chord progressions and, you know, harmonization and that kind of thing.
That's right. You have to understand where you are. The chord progression is where you're standing, and then given that you're standing there, what's acceptable to say and what can you say and what's your vocabulary, and all that comes from the same place to me. Some things are inappropriate things to say. If I was playing in the key of D and I thought I would start speaking a sentence in the key of B flat, that would seem inappropriate. So I would have to know how to act at the same time. But I think at our age, you're older than I am, but it's a very difficult thing to learn improv.
Hey, I had a question for both Michael and Ben. With technological advancements such as putting people into space, there are a lot of obstacles and problems that have to be solved. I was curious how much you think creativity goes into problem solving, both in the context of a song and in the context of rocket science. Thanks.
Well, it's more obvious in music, but as we were saying, Michael feels that, or probably knows that, his job is to do something really, really well. And I would add, you didn't say this, that not many people that have ever been born could probably do that well. It has to be perfect, just about. But someone, somewhere, is inventing and engineering everything from the idea of how to go and why to how to design the machinery and the engineering is creative, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's a great example, or it's a great point, and I can point to a recent example, and that is that we've been going to space for 60 years, more or less, with humans, and only in the last several have we thought about, or at least been successful at, landing a booster back on Earth and using it again. And this technology is certainly enabled by advances in IT, so basically computer processing speeds, right? That's what has made that possible. And so I think the question is, it's kind of I'm not sure what the boundary between creativity and innovation is, but I might say that innovation is using creative processes to take advantage of technological change, right? So you have more tools in your toolbox, and it takes some creativity to figure out how to use them.
That's a really good point. I've always thought that musical innovation is not often chalked up to simple technology, that there are new tools and musicians are going, what can I do with this tool? How can I record with 24 tracks? Oh, shit, really? I've got 48. Oh, I've got 248. What can I do with this? And that, when I listen to music history or pop music history anyway, that's almost all I'm hearing is a difference in people dealing with their tools. Let me think. I'm stumbling because it's such an unlikely pairing that I'm actually really excited about that you and I are talking. But it's not the normal thing. You know that there's some footage of early astronauts, and they're flying through space, and they're in their machine, and they're throwing a radio back and forth, and the radio is spinning. And you're hearing country music on it, and then it goes spinning back again to the other side, and they're hearing. Do sound waves sound and react in the space station or in the various ships like you would think they would from Earth, or do they have a certain quality to the sound that is different than Earth?
All that is based on the environment that you're in. And when I say environment, I mean like the physical environment, how much air there is, what the pressure is, what the temperature is, and what the constituents are. And on board the space station, the atmosphere is identical to what it is here on Earth at sea level. So yes, the short answer is yes.
It sounds the same.
We don't have a beautiful sound system with, deep subwoofers or anything like that, unfortunately. Yeah. But pretty much the same.
Yeah. So you're the mode of the pitch is going to be the same as it would be on Earth. It's just the room. It just happens to be in a different place, and nothing magical about that. When I see the radio spinning, the sound I was hearing on the documentary didn't spin. It didn't change with it, and it made me wonder if they just simply overdubbed that so that you could hear it, or if actually the direction somehow of the sound pressure was not the same.
No, I would guess that you're right. I mean, the gravity doesn't affect sound, at least to my knowledge, materially. And so I think if the thing were spinning and there was only a speaker on one end of it, you would in fact hear, changes as it came and went out of your field of hearing.
Just simple sound pressure, sound waves, just like it is on Earth. What about you were talking about some of the photograph of the boot. And it made me think of, as a photographer, how incredible it is that the first astronauts that went up were given what looked to me like Hasselblads, or maybe they were Olaflexes or something, which require, I can't imagine, the contrast must be incredible on the moon. Like when you're in space and you're doing your extravehicular walks, you're seeing like stark differences in contrast, aren't you?
Yeah, the sun is extraordinarily bright when you're in the daylight, and of course, when you're in the shadow of the Earth at night, it's pretty dark.
Yeah.
So yeah, there are some, and just the difference between the sunlit surface of the station and then something that's in shadow is dramatic. To the point that those temperature things, the differences I was describing, since there's no atmosphere, it is pure radiation from the sun or lack of radiation. So it really is a very stark environment out there. Today, we have pretty sophisticated cameras that we take outside. Obviously, they're all digital, and everything is set to auto because, we don't want to be spending our time getting creative out there. But back in the day, you're right. They were using 5-inch Hasselblads and Aeroflex 16 millimeter cameras to take the movies.
And so the astronauts had to know pretty quickly. You're talking about film with not as much dynamic range as what you could work with. So they're having to make a decision on the film the shutter speed and the aperture and catch the widest amount of contrast I can imagine. They must have had to have some pretty intense training in photography for that.
Yeah, we do spend, I mean, back, I started at NASA in the early 90s, and we were still using the Hasselblad, which is all manual focus, manual aperture, manual shutter speed. And, we would do a technique called bracketing. So we take a picture that we thought was exposed right, then we take one, half a stop bigger. Yeah.
Would they have you bracket in terms of the aperture or the shutter speed? Which one? Just curious that they have you.
Aperture.
Yeah. So you leave it at like 125th 5 seconds or something, and then you just go F8, F5.6, F11, 2 or 3 of them. Interesting. I've never looked at a contact sheet from the earliest missions, but I'm really impressed with how good the photography is. Do you have anything? I'm just racking my brain because I think this is I look at this as an amazing opportunity that I almost didn't have any way to prepare for. Because honestly, what you're saying, the supposition of my show is, or podcast is, everyone's creative, create something in their life. So if you want to make your life better, think about creativity in the way that an artist might. And here's some things that you can do. I had one other than you that suggested that, one, science wasn't always creative. He's a neurologist. And he also suggested that there were plenty of people who weren't terribly creative, which blows a big hole in my show. But I love that because I love thinking about that. If you were had to be the professor of creativity for one day at a high school, let's say, and they just throw you in there improvising, and you needed to come up with an exercise for people to help with their creativity in everyday life, could you pull anything out of thin air for the class? I do this to each guest. It's like, give me an exercise that you think if people did for a week, a small amount of time, just a few minutes a day, that they would get out of creative ruts easier.
Wow. What I might do in that circumstance is give everybody a piece of white 8.5 by 11 paper and a number 2 pencil and do with it whatever. Draw, write, fold it up. I don't know how many options there are, but that's probably where I would start.
Right. I like that. So kids, that is your assignment, to get out a piece of 8 by 11 notebook paper once a day. Let's say you want to do it in the morning.
Not notebook paper, no lines. I want it to be blank, lines. White piece of paper, printer paper.
White piece of printer paper. Any time of day that this needs to be done?
It's interesting. I imagine that people who are creative are not everybody has the same time preference. A little bit like some people like working out in the morning, some people like working out in the afternoon or after work or in the evening even. I imagine that creative people are like that. So I'd leave that up to the as an exercise to the user.
Any day, any time of day you want to. Every day, pull out a piece of blank white paper, do with it whatever occurs to you, and you'll have 7 of them at the end of the week, and then we'll get your address and everyone can send them to you.
Now, what might be a bit more practical in the long term is to take that same piece of paper and the pencil and write 500 words about your day. That would have to be at the end of the day, probably. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the week, you'll have a nice start to a journal.
It's true. Have you? I looked for the possibility that you had written or were writing a book, and I saw nothing out there so far. Any ideas of writing a book?
I've talked to a lot of people about it, and my observation is that many of my colleagues have written books, and the bookshelves seem to be flooded with books by former astronauts. And when I have something truly unique story to tell, I'll tell it, but not yet.
I've got one unique story to tell you. Now you're the third person I've spoken to that has gone to space in any form. The first person was I was at a urinal next to Buzz Aldrin.
You don't hear that very often.
No, just taking a piss. I looked over, was like, wow, that's him. Awesome. Talked to him for about 2 seconds, as you do at a urinal. And then, of course, there's William Shatner and you, and it is like an absolute honor. I was the one who was intimidated, but I did learn a lot from talking to you. I need to talk to more people if they're out there like you. I think this is probably fairly unique combination that makes you you. But it's a real breath of fresh air, because we artists just bullshit constantly. That's part of our job. And to speak with someone who seems to not even know what that means. What does the word bullshit mean? Like, I really have enjoyed and appreciate talking to you. Is there anything else that I can add or that would be helpful to you or me or anyone to say before I sign off?
It's been a pleasure and also very, very different for me. And I've appreciated this little foray into creativity, so to speak. I would encourage you to stay tuned. Right now, our launch date is February 21st out of Cape Canaveral. It might be on that day. It might not be on that day, but it'll be an exciting launch and an exciting mission. And, we're going to be part of history, and we feel that responsibility. We're taking it very seriously, and very anxious to get there.
Yeah. Well, it's really exciting. Thank you for what you do, and I'll be tuned in for sure.
All right, Ben. All the best to you.
All right. Take care of yourself.
Hi, if you're enjoying listening to Lightning Bugs, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. It helps a lot. Thank you so much for watching Lightning Bugs on YouTube. Check out more episodes and subscribe if you have not already. You can also listen to Lightning Bugs wherever podcasts may be found.